Hi, Adadu. Can you hear me? We'll be underway in a minute. Okay, we'll get underway. So my name is Bruce Miller. Welcome, and I'm with RimTech Consulting. And today's topic is migrating records into an EDRMS. It can be a pretty big task for sure. So here are some considerations when you're looking at a migration into an EDRMS. Now, EDRMS stands for Electronic Document and Records Management System or software. And it's basically a document management system. In this case, I'm going to use SharePoint as the example. And it'll have some records management software brought to bear to manage the content in SharePoint. Purview, Gimmal, RecordPoint, Collabware, whatever it is. Okay. So here are some considerations. Cleanup, which is not migration. What to migrate. We've got to talk about case records, and that's really important. Few records managers fully and deeply understand case records enough to know how to deal with it in an EDRMS, so that's a very important topic. We'll look at mapping metadata, the old to the new, and we'll talk about create date, which is an element of a migration that's important. And finally, we'll look at how to estimate the cost of a migration, because I think a lot of people are doing it incorrectly. So that's the topic, 7 topics. We're going to talk about each one of them. Now, first of all, what does compliance mean? The whole idea of an EDRMS is to make darn sure that we're compliant. So compliance to me means that every document in SharePoint complies or adheres to the retention schedule, which means every document has an appropriate retention rule assigned to it. Number 2 is all the documents are being managed as a record. Notice I never said are a record. I said being managed as a record, which is what really matters. And that means 3 things. Number 1, they're immutable, which means neither the content, the document itself, nor the metadata associated with it can be altered by anyone. And has been assigned a retention rule. And most importantly, 60% of all modern records or more are case records, which means they're event-based trigger date rules. 60% of them. And we have to make sure that those 60% have the events and the trigger dates properly applied to them. And finally, number 3 is we can do a disposition. In my opinion, about 95% or so, or maybe even higher, of all EDRMS projects on the planet today are failures, which means they cannot do a disposition. Why not? Because they don't have the confidence. What does the confidence mean? Confidence means you can prove that you have 85, 90% or higher classification accuracy rate among all those millions of documents. Bottom line is a few years from now, when you press one button to destroy millions of records, you've got to have the confidence that they're properly classified or you'll never pull the switch. So many projects out there are never going to be able to do a disposition. They're just simply not. So that's what I mean by compliance. So again, the assumption of the session today is that the target we're migrating documents into is a properly run, properly operated EDRMS. Okay. So the first thing to look at is cleanup very quickly and very simply. What does cleanup mean? It means get rid of the RIOT, R-I-O-T, redundant, outdated, inaccessible, and transient. Just get rid of the junk. That's really all cleanup means. So how do you do that? Well, we could spend a whole hour just on that, but I would just recommend you buy a tool called Tree Size Pro. I don't sell it. I don't sell that software at all, but I recommend it. I use it, and it's cheap, and it allows you to analyze your file share to say, what do we have? How old is it? how can I separate the active content from the lesser active content? It's a very useful utility. I just downloaded the copy. I paid, I think, $110 US for it for a perpetual license. No big deal, but very, very useful tool. And now it can analyze not only file shares, but Teams, Microsoft Teams, which is very, very useful. Okay. So you can do a number of analysis with this. The one that I recommend is sort everything by age. If you've got 2 million documents, it'll do that for you. Uh, Set aside or demarcate the oldest 10 years worth or the youngest 5 years worth. That's the kind of thing you can do with TreeSize Pro. You can also sort all the files by activity level, which is the most active documents to the least active, where active means how many people have touched it, printed it, looked at it, edited it, done anything with it. Okay, so you can sort by activity. So those are the kind of things you want to do to help clean stuff up. It also has a feature where you can identify uh, um, temporary files, .tmps. It has an extensive list of the types of files that many popular software apps use to create temporary files. So you can clean up and get rid of that stuff as well. Temporary system files, that kind of stuff. Here's a screen capture from it right here. Um, it goes to show that what kind of data do you have, right? It can sort it by what's system data that you got to stay away from and what's not system data, that kind of thing. And here you can um, do extensive filtering of what am I interested in? Well, I'm only interested in my PDFs or only interested in HTML. So you can really get good, meaningful reports out of it to help you decide what you want, what's high value, and what's lesser value. So now let's get into some strategy, which is the first thing is what to migrate. Now, I'm very heavily biased on this, very heavily biased, but I think that migrations are enormous effort, enormous cost, and rarely necessary. I think we over migrate. Too many of my clients over the years have made this assumption. Well, I've been using the file share for 20 years and I need all these documents in the new system. No, you don't. So the goal here is only migrate that which you truly need. Okay. So here are my 6 principles of a migration. Number 1, use a good tool. Now there's at least 3 that come to mind. Um, uh, they're, they can be very expensive or very cheap, but I'm thinking as a minimum entry tool would be ShareGate. It's a Canadian product, very, very well respected, very well used, and it's made for migration. Timing is going to be a factor. Metadata, you remember, if you're going from a file share into a mature SharePoint fully developed EDRMS, you're going from basically zero metadata to a lot of metadata. So that's going to be a factor. Only migrate what you absolutely need. And number 5, that's probably the most important one of all, which is we got to deal with our cases. I'll show you how. And let's not forget email. Email are important records, so you should be getting those into your EDRMS as well, right? Okay, so this is my overall recommended strategy. Put everything into 3 tiers. One is we're going to keep it behind. We're not going to migrate it. We're just not. Why? Because it's lesser value. Somebody wants it, they can always search on the file share or on this disk drive or this location for it, but it's low value. Then there's the second tier, which is lift and shift, which is we're going to take a whole whack of data and we're going to stick it on SharePoint, but we're not going to migrate it. Migrate it means move it into its permanent resting place. Lift and shift says just dump it in there. Forget metadata. We're going to do no work on it. Just literally dump it in a holding area. So you might want to set aside a library and call it, I don't know, old stuff or whatever. And it can be messy and it can be filled with 10,000 folders and all the 17 levels of folder nesting. However messy the original source is, It can stay that way. All you're doing is literally lifting it, shifting it, dropping it. That's not a migration. It's not. That's just moving data from point A to point B and not changing it in any way, shape, or form. Is that a permanent thing? No, it must not be. But when it's there, at least it's in SharePoint in a library called old stuff or whatever you want to call it, or maybe a site called old stuff, whatever you want to call it. And then users at their leisure can move documents from that temporary storage place into the permanent EDRMS. The beauty of it is that when they do, when they move a document in, they're forced to fill out the proper metadata and they're putting it in the proper places in the proper EDRMS. So some people might consider that to be a migration. I don't, but whatever you call it, it's a good idea. And it can take care of a lot of documents because proper true migration is expensive and time consuming. So that leads me to number 3, which is true migration. That's the high value documents that you must have in SharePoint, in the EDRMS. There's no negotiation. It's not up for grabs. It's not a subjective opinion. It's not an assumption. Here's an example. Suppose you're working on collective bargaining and you're dealing with 3 union contracts at the same time and you're halfway through. Well, you've got 3 bargaining folders on your file share filled with active documents and you're working on them day in and day out. That's active stuff. That should go into the equivalent appropriate places in the EDRMS. That's a true migration of truly active documents. Okay. And there we're going to have to match the old metadata with the new metadata and make sure that everything fits properly. That's where the time and cost comes into it. So of the 3 tiers, number 3, you want to squeeze that down to the absolute minimum that you can possibly get it down to because it's a lot of work and time. So here's an example of old versus the new. You might have a folder called projects. And in it, you have a subfolder, a nesting level for project types, and then the year of the project, and then the project name. So if that's your folder structure, in an EDRMS, a modern EDRMS, I'm not just referring exclusively to SharePoint here, but any modern EDRMS, there should be no folders. Let me repeat that. There should be no folders. Each nesting level of source folders should become a piece of metadata in the target system. So if you've already got your target system built and there is an activity in your retention schedule called projects, you're not going to have subfolders. You're going to have metadata, project name, project type, year, project manager, whatever is appropriate. But there will be a library called projects, and each project will be a case. Now, what do I mean by a case? A case, which we'll get to in a few minutes, is a business activity that consists of a series of repeated adventures. And each adventure has a start and an end to it, i.e., like projects. So we'll cover that in a few minutes. But your target EDRMS, if it's built healthy, and again, most are not, but if it is, then you will have a project library and it will be broken into cases, okay? So each of these projects up above here, project 1 goes down to project 1 here, project 2 goes down here. But instead of nested folders, we just have metadata for each of these. Now, here are 4 things to think about because I'm going to assume today that we're dealing with SharePoint, okay? Microsoft SharePoint, SharePoint Online in particular. So there are 4 things that come into play when you're migrating documents. Number 1 is the view. The view says what metadata does the user see when they look in that library. Number 2 is a column display order. Column equals metadata. So you can think of it of left to right or top to bottom. But when you're migrating, you have to realize that you've got to account for that in the target system. What order are we going to present the columns in? And then you have common versus shared behavior. That's a bit advanced for today. I won't get into that very much. Excuse me. But a common library is a library that is duplicated for multiple business units because they don't want to expose their records to other business units. So, for example, expense reports. Business Unit A doesn't want Business Unit B to be prying into their expense reports and vice versa. So they both get the same library, expense reports, 2 copies of exactly the same library. That's what they want. That's what they're going to get. So you have to take that into account when you're doing a migration. Which common library is it going to go into? And finally, um, there's a feature in SharePoint where a user, when they're putting a document into a library, they can create a folder. We don't want that. So be sure to disable it. It is easily disabled. So now let's talk about the tricky stuff, which is case records. This is very important. I can't even say how important it is, but 60% of all records are case records, minimum 60%, in many cases much higher. And no EDRMS can exist without understanding and deploying case records properly. So typically 60 to 80%, and there's 2 points I want to make about case records. Number one is it's the single biggest point of failure of modern EDRMS projects by far. And number two is if you get it right, then it has a profound effect on how SharePoint is structured. Here's an example of a modern retention schedule where each row in this spreadsheet is a category or business activity in the retention schedule. And you'll notice here that each row has a yes or a no under case. Why is that? Because the software needs to know for every retention category or series in the retention schedule, are you going to be case or are you not case? A case means that the retention rules will be event date plus X years, then delete or transfer or whatever. Non-case means age-based retention. The software will take today's date, subtract the document date, which yields the age. Then it'll compare the age with the retention period. And if it's younger than the retention period, it'll keep it. If it's older, it'll mark it for disposition. So every single one of your activities in your retention schedule must specify this for any modern EDRMS. So which are the 60%? It's those business activities that are about a person, place, event, or a thing. They all end. So the business activity is a series of repeated adventures, and each adventure generates records unique to that adventure and ends when the adventure is over. A good example is audits. You'll be doing a health and safety audit in February. It might take you 2 months. It's done. That creates a set of records for that audit. You do another audit in November or financial statements. Different audit, different records, different end date. So a good example are contracts, employee records, and projects. Series of repeated adventures, each of which comes to an end. So in SharePoint, you have to separate the records by case, or you can't track. Why? Because each adventure has a uniquely different end date. For example, each employee will have a different termination date, right? Every union grievance will have a different end date. So if you have, for example, 1,000 contracts, 1,000 projects, and 1,000 employees, you better have 3,000 event dates or end dates, whatever you choose to call them, right? And what about the other 40%? Well, they're non-case or administrative records. The business activity is ongoing. It is not a series of repeated adventures. So the retention is based on the age. So documents age out one by one, whereas with case records, it's the adventure or the case ages out in its entirety. So all the records in a given case are aging out according to the retention period. Now that leads to this conclusion, which is in SharePoint, should you happen to have 1,000 contracts, and you will in some organizations, in many organizations, you will have 1,000 contracts, then anytime you put a document in SharePoint, you have no choice but to force the user to tell you which contract this document is related to. How do you do that? Doesn't matter. It can be a drop down, a pop up, a fly out. The mechanism doesn't matter, but the mathematics does. There is no way to construct a SharePoint without forcing the user to tell us which contract this is about, which of the 1,000 contracts, or which of the 1,000 employees this document is related to. There is absolutely no choice. It doesn't have to be a drop down, but it has to be a mechanism to force the user to choose. Now, here's where that kind of comes home to roost here. Here we have a retention schedule with 253 activities in it, or what I call categories. 250 of them are administrative categories, but 3 of them are not. 3 of them are case categories. That would be contracts, employees, and projects. We have 1,000 contracts, which means 1,000 cases. We have 1,000 employees, 1,000 cases, 1,000 projects, 1,000 more cases. Total 3,000 cases. Each case has an end date. So we need to store, record, and track, and the record software has to apply 3,000 end dates to 3,000 different cases. So typical EDRMS will have 12 records per person per day. So if we have 1,000 users, that's a flow rate, 12,000 records hitting us every single day. Where are they going to go? Well, they got to go somewhere in SharePoint. If out of the 12,000, 60% of them will be case. That means 7,200 of them are going to go into 3,000 different potential cases. What about the 4,800 that are not cases? Well, they're going to go in one of these 250 places in SharePoint. So for this example, we need 3,250 different targets or places in SharePoint for those records to go every day. Now, here's a more granular detail. This is an example from a live SharePoint EDRMS. The business activity is competitive procurement. And every procurement is an adventure with an end date. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different adventures or cases, each one with a different ending date. Okay. And when the user goes to put a document into procurement, competitive, they have to choose which case is this related to. Well, this document is about the landscaping services procurement, not the bucket truck procurement. It's about this one. So the user has to navigate into that container. Okay. So imagine in your SharePoint EDRMS, you have maybe, I don't know, a couple of hundred sites, 1 or 200 sites. Each site can have 50 or 60 libraries, and 60% of all of those libraries are subdivided into containers or cases. Think about that for a minute. That's a lot of target destinations in SharePoint. So that's what you're migrating into. So everything you migrate into a modern EDRMS has to fit into this structure, one way or the other. So let's make that work, shall we? So here's an example of a file share in blue here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of metadata. But in SharePoint, we have a activity called projects, which is most likely a library. And in that library called projects, there'll be a content type called projects. And in it, we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 metadata fields. So we have 5 source and 7 targets. So what are we going to do? Well, the file name is a straight transfer. The owner in the file share will have to become the author in the SharePoint. The create date is the create date. Last modified date is fine. The path, what's that going to be? Well, who knows? But what we can do is we can insert the path into the project name because maybe the path indicates the project name. But we've got to have a project type and we have to have a year. There is no project type. There is no year. So what we had to do is we had to manually force these three values into the target system for every document we migrate into it. So that's what I mean by metadata mapping. You have to look at the metadata you have in the source, look at what you need in the destination, and decide column by column what you're going to do for each one of those columns. So here's an example of a file share in blue with 4 levels of nesting in the folders. But in SharePoint, what do we have? We have a site, a library name, a content type, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns. Now this example in yellow at the top is a target SharePoint that is not a case, okay? Or sorry, it is a case actually, now that I look at it, it has a reference number for case. So we've got to dig out all the data from each of these folders, and each folder nesting level is likely to be a piece of metadata, right? So we had to figure out how to fit it into this one. Down below is a much, much more detailed one. So here we have the meeting name, the date, the location of the meeting, whether it's an internal or external meeting, who attended it, who was absent, was it an in-camera meeting, and was it recorded? That's all the metadata that we had to fill in. Now, those are the case columns, meaning that in a proper EDRMS, the system knows the difference between a case column and a document column. A case column are columns about the case at large, not the documents in particular. Document columns are metadata about the document in particular, not the case in general. For example, the name of the meeting is the same regardless of all the documents, right? But the document, each document can have a different subject, right? So this is what we have to deal with in a good, properly structured target EDRMS. So let's try to work an example through here. Here's a good example right here. We have 2 target destinations in the EDRMS: agreements general and employee work history. And by the way, these are live from actual clients of ours. So here we have, I don't know, maybe 20 metadata fields for agreements. So this shows the name of the column or the field type, and what we're going to do with it, right? So what do we have in the source? File name, we have 4 levels of folder name. Each folder has a name. That's what I mean by folder name, right? And then we have a create date, a modified date, and an author. That's all we have. So we need to make some decisions here. File name, straight through. The first folder level, let's pretend that it has it contains the name of the agreement. Well, that's great. So the folder name is going to become the agreement name. Now, let's pretend that the next folder level was the version. Okay, so now we'll set that version number to the version column in SharePoint. If the next one was the type of agreement, the next folder level, then that can become the agreement type in the SharePoint. And maybe the counterparty name, the other party, could become counterparty name. Now, business units. There's no business unit down here, but there is in SharePoint. What are we going to do? We're going to have to manually stuff it. That's what we call it, stuffing it with a value. So we're going to have to specify the name of the business unit here. We got to find that out somehow. The law firm name and the contact details, no clue. It's not shown anywhere here. There's no metadata that tells it. We're not about to read all these documents and figure it out. So what are we going to do? Well, these are mandatory fields. Law firm name and contact details, mandatory. So we're going to put in the word unknown, stuff it with unknown and unknown, okay? Approved, yes or no. No such source metadata. But we've got to know, has this case been, or has this agreement been approved or not? Well, we don't know. So let's just stuff it with the value no. Not going to kill us, but we have to have a yes or a no in there, right? Approved by, date approved, and agreement end date and end date. Those fields are optional. They're not mandatory. So we can leave them blank forever. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to leave them blank. Now, the subject keywords in SharePoint means what is this document about? Well, that's an easy one. We're going to take the file name and stick it in there. The true document date, we don't know. So we're going to put today's date in there automatically. Continuous overwrite, well, we won't get into all the rest of that. That's modern privacy related metadata. But I think you can see the pattern. We have to make a decision for each one of these target or destination columns. We have to make a decision and record it by filling out a spreadsheet. Then that spreadsheet becomes a mapping for whatever migration software tool you're using, be it ShareGate or whatever. Okay. And there's another example over here, employee work history. Same idea, but look at all the thought, time, thinking, and care that goes into this. This is just for one target library and one source folder, right? One, just one. Multiply this by the number of source folders times the number of destination libraries, you got yourself a lot of work here, a lot. So here's an example of an organization that has 4 folder levels in their file share, and these are the names of the documents. There is no way to tell by the name what these documents are really about. There's just not. But we can assume that they're all related to org charts in the department known as Secretariat. That's a pretty safe bet. So what do? Well, here is the target SharePoint structure. We got our site, library, content type, and we have our metadata over here. The subject, the true document date, reference number, year, and does it contain personally identifiable information, sensitive and information protection level, typical modern EDRMS. So what are we going to do with these documents? Well, the site is going to be procurement. The library name, let's make it org charts. And let's take the file name and stuff it into the subject keywords field because that's all we got. It's the best we got, right? Good or bad, it's the best we have. What about the true document date? Well, we'll just put today's date in there. Could these documents be 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old? Yeah. But how much work are you willing to do, right? You could do this. You could, if you're a little more ambitious, you could take the last modified date and stick it in here, or maybe the create date and stick it in here. Here, I'm being a little lazy, just putting today's date in. We have no reference numbers. The year of the document. Well, we're going to have to put it in there somehow. Just type in, you can default to today's year if you want. Contains personally identifiable information. Well, who knows? We're not about to crack open these documents and find out. So let's just make a blanket assumption and say no. No PII and no sensitive information. And we'll make them all confidential, right? So you're making some pretty heavy duty assumptions here. Nothing is going to be perfect. If you want to make this perfect, you're going to spend a fortune and take forever, neither of which is acceptable, right? So this is another similar example for what we call absences, which is a document type. So again, we're just stuffing fields with whatever we think is appropriate. So that's mapping. Now, there's one little rub in SharePoint. And I shouldn't say little. The way that SharePoint works is it has a column, a system column. Every document has it called create date, but it's a lie. It's really not the create date. It's really the date loaded into SharePoint. Why do we care? It's because 40% of all modern records are going to have an age-based calculation carried out on them for retention. How does it do it? It takes today's date, subtracts the document's date, which yields the age. Then it compares the age against the retention period. But If you migrate 10,000 documents from the last 15 years and move them into SharePoint, guess what? They all have the same create date, which is today's date. So later, when your EDRMS carries out its disposition calculations, they're all wrong. They're all wrong, right? So remember, the create date in SharePoint is not the document's date. It is the date the item was loaded in. Create date is a lie. So, um, what's the fix? Well, I can only tell you what to look for, which is when you're purchasing your migration software, make sure you buy a product that allows you to set the creation date in the target SharePoint to the actual document's date of the source. Not all products do it. ShareGate does it, but I would never use a piece of software that didn't do that. If you're not doing records management, that doesn't matter. But because we are doing records, it does matter. So let's finish up with the cost. This one I find kind of hilarious. I've seen so many companies estimate cost of migration by how many documents are you going to migrate? Nothing could be further from that. So this is a recommended change. Now here's our assumptions. Let's say that the typical file share folder depth is 3. Average, 3 levels of depth in the folder nesting. Let's further say that the average documents per folder is 25. We have 300 destination target libraries in SharePoint. And a typical modern healthy EDRMS has 14 metadata fields on average. That's just a fact, statistical average. Now, let's further assume that it's a really good quality EDRMS that is integrating Outlook with SharePoint. So people are putting email into SharePoint as records. Let's just assume that. You'd have to use a third-party product like Caligo, Harmony, or I forget the name of the other one, but there's a few on the market. Let's assume you're using a product like ShareGate and that all your permissions are already in place in the target system, okay? Now, assumption number 8 is highly unlikely to be true, but wouldn't it be sweet if there was a folder for every case? That would be nice. Highly unlikely, but boy, oh boy, if it were, that'd be fantastic. But we're going to assume that for the moment, just for the sake of simplicity. So here's how we estimate the cost. The setup time, remember the table where we were going through each column and figuring out what are we going to do with it? This is the old, this is the new. How long will that take to fill in that spreadsheet? 15 minutes. Now, we got to do that for every source folder. Don't forget. So, uh, how long will it take the migration software to run for the contents of that folder? You know what? I don't care. It doesn't really matter. You're not doing anything while it's running. Go to bed. So let's say a minute or two, but it doesn't really matter. And there are going to be mistakes. We're going to have to go back and check and see, oh, we shouldn't have said that. We shouldn't have done that. That didn't work out well. So let's allocate, let's say 5 minutes for that. So total 21 minutes per folder to get it all figured out, rationalize, fill in the table, feed the table into the migration software, and press go. How many documents it processes and how long it takes, I could care less. It doesn't matter to me. What matters is my time. So if we assume $200 an hour, then what we can do is we can say, okay, the true cost is not driven by how long it takes to migrate. It's driven by the time it takes us to figure out the mapping and what to do with them. If we assume 21 minutes per source folder, then if we do 10 folders, that's 3.5 hours, $700. So you can just extrapolate based on the number of folders. I think that's a far, far more realistic way to price out the cost. I just realized I never spelled estimating correctly, but that aside, I really think that this is a far better approach to costing. Uh, of migrations. And we know that if we have users do this manually, well, they're not going to get this done very well, right? So what we don't want to do is to force users to manage theirs, to um, do a migration on their own. What we want them to do is just put documents in the right places, into the right cases, fill in the metadata, done. That's all we need from them, nothing more. Okay? So let's just wrap this up with a conclusion, which is clean up first, use tools like tree size, divide your migration into 3 stages, leave it behind, lift and shift, and migrate. Uh, Got to get your case records in order or there's going to be trouble. And the cost will be driven by folder nesting and the number of folders, nothing else. So that's it. Are there any questions? Would you also add project start date and project end date? If you know that kind of metadata, then yes. If you're migrating into cases, cases will live forever unless somebody puts in an end date. So whether you do it at migration time or post-migration, someone is going to have to fill in the end dates for each of these cases, or the retention will never pick it up and do anything with it. Are there any other questions? I'll be around a few minutes if you have any more. No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking their time out from your day to attend. I really appreciate it very much. And I'll send you an email tomorrow with a link so you can download the recording.